Welcome back to another Book Talk with Tracy. As promised, I'm reading Chapter 2 from my book, Play It Again. If you missed Chapter 1, you can go back and watch the previous episode. But today's reading is from the female point of view in this 1980s rock and roll romance. Deanie yawned and stretched as she swung her legs over the side of the bed. She padded to the window, threw it open, and inhaled deeply of the fragrant autumn air. It was early September, and some of the trees had already taken on a twinge of color, yet the air was still very warm. It was going to be a beautiful day. She smiled to herself. She hadn't felt this good in a long time. All her senses were alive this morning. Perhaps it was a sign of good things to come. A snore came from one of the double beds. She looked over at the small man who lay tangled in the sheets and allowed a fond smile to cross her lips. How many mornings had she wakened like this? Different hotel rooms, different cities. Being the daughter of a vagabond musician was an unconventional upbringing, to be sure, but it was one that she wouldn't trade for anything in the world. "Wake up, sleepyhead," she said as she gently shook the man in the bed. "What?" Jack Burton opened groggy eyes, finally focusing on his daughter. "Go away, girl. You know I don't like mornings." With a sound similar to a growl, he turned over and put his head under the pillow. "Not so fast. I haven't seen you in 6 weeks, remember? I didn't come all the way out here just to watch you sleep." "What time is it?" Jack's muffled voice came from under the pillow. 9 a.m., Deanie replied, glancing at the digital clock on the nightstand. "Really, honey, couldn't you let your old man sleep for just another hour? You know I'm not much good for anything in the mornings, and I'm not as young as I used to be." "Well, you go on ahead. Do some exploring or something. I'll meet you for lunch." With a sigh, Jack settled back down into his pillow. Deanie gave him a playful shake, but conceded, "I'll let you get away with it this time." She thought she heard a mumbled, "Don't know what I ever did to that girl," coming from under the pillow, and she just smiled. Actually, she was surprised at how wide awake she felt this morning, considering she had driven out to Hecla last night after dark. She hadn't seen Jack for most of the summer. What with his group traveling to so many summer festivals, it was a grueling pace for the aging foursome. Deanie's own job as a waitress in a Winnipeg bar kept her from joining her father on the road, as she often liked to do. Serving drinks in a lounge was not a profession she would have chosen, given a choice, but she needed to make a living, and the tips were good. She'd saved enough money over the course of the summer to pay for her tuition and books for the fall semester. She'd arrived last night after her father was already performing. It had been so good to see him again, and just as wonderful to hear him play. She loved her father's music almost as much as she loved the man behind it. It was such an inseparable part of him, an extension of his spirit that allowed others a glimpse of the man within. She was beginning to wonder if she was being too rigid in her decision to quit the music scene herself. Oh well. There was no point in trying to figure out her entire future in one morning, especially on such a beautiful morning. What she really needed was to catch some more of those late summer rays before they gave way to the inevitable icy winds of a Manitoba winter. She donned a pair of shorts and a halter top, catching a glimpse of herself in the full-length mirror. She winced. Tall was okay, and most people would do anything to be so slim, but she did wish, on occasion, for a few more curves. Make do with the hand you got dealt, though. That's what Jack always said. She shoved her dark glasses onto her nose and strode out the door. The deck wound around the hotel, a rambling 2-story structure with a distinctly Icelandic flair. Some small private patios off the main floor suites were connected to a large common area that overlooked a small pond. Flowers were still blooming brightly along its edges, and there were plenty of deck chairs. There was a breeze blowing off the lake beyond, ruffling the leaves of the deciduous trees. Already the gold and burnt reds of autumn had touched much of the foliage. Several people were out enjoying the morning. She noticed a dark, well-built man stretched out on one of the loungers, reading. She also noticed an empty lounge chair beside him and headed in his direction. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked. The man looked up. If she wasn't mistaken, he didn't seem pleased. "Suit yourself," came his crisp reply. She bit back her own curt response. She felt like turning around, but pride wouldn't let her. Keeping her head high, she settled herself into the lounge chair. "Thanks. Beautiful day, isn't it?" she commented, overly bright. The man appeared to be ignoring her. "I said beautiful day, isn't it?" she repeated. Was the man's non-committal grunt. He didn't look up. "I'm just here for the weekend," Jeannie continued, "from Winnipeg." She wasn't sure why, but she felt determined to get a response. "Some weather we're having, eh?" She frowned. What was the guy's problem? He could at least be civil. Her own hot temper was beginning to take over. He would speak more than a mumbled syllable, even if she had to irritate him into doing it. "I think fall must be my favorite time of year. Don't you think so? The air is so fresh and clean, and being out here in the wilderness, it just makes you feel alive. Don't you agree?" The man sat silently for a few more minutes before lowering his papers with deliberateness. He lifted his sunglasses, and his dark blue eyes bore straight through hers. "I'm not interested, so you might as well not waste your time or mine." If irritating him had been her objective, she certainly seemed to have succeeded. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice rising ever so slightly. She sat upright in her lounger to look him squarely in the face. "I don't want or need your services," was the blunt reply. "What?" Deanie's temper exploded as she catapulted from the chair, sending it onto its side. What kind of thing is that to say to a perfect stranger?" "I saw you hanging all over your 60-year-old boyfriend last night, but don't worry, I won't tell him about today." He eyed her with open contempt. 60-year-old boyfriend?" Jeannie echoed, her brow creasing. "What the—" Suddenly the light of understanding dawned. Slowly a grin replaced her frown. You thought Jack and I— Wow, that is too funny." The man's frown only deepened. "Rather than laugh, you should be ashamed." "Of what? Jack Burton is my father." Warm color slowly suffused his cheeks. "Now I think you're the one who should be ashamed for even thinking such a thing," Deanie said with a wide grin. I didn't think." He fumbled for words. "I beg your pardon. I'm very sorry." He jumped to his feet and righted her lounge chair, waiting until she had seated herself before sitting down again himself. "Forget it," Deanie said lightly. "Phew, I've been accused of a lot of things, but—" "I really am extremely sorry," he repeated. "I don't normally jump to conclusions without knowing all the facts." "It doesn't matter." Deanie waved a dismissive hand. "Actually, it's pretty hilarious. Wait till I tell Jack. He'll get a charge out of it." "It wasn't that funny," he said, the corners of his own mouth beginning to twitch. "Well, sure it was, especially when you realized. You should have seen yourself. Could have just crawled under the nearest rock to hide." "I guess I really did put my foot in my mouth, didn't I? Please accept my apology." "I said I already did." There was an awkward moment of silence. Deanie was trying to hide the smirk that was relentlessly pulling at the corners of her mouth. Finally, the man cleared his throat. "Well then, allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Russ Graham." He reached over to extend a hand in a businesslike manner. Deanie took his hand. She wasn't prepared for the warmth that shot straight up her arm and through her chest. He must have felt it too, judging from the little intake of breath she heard upon contact. "Nice to meet you, Russ. I'm Deanie Burton." Their eyes caught and held for a moment as they continued to shake hands in slow motion. Russ cleared his throat and retrieved his hand. Pleased to meet you, he said, his voice sounding gruff. He cleared his throat again and picked up the discarded papers, shuffling them. Deanie felt a rush of butterfly wings in her stomach. He was so good-looking, and his eyes. She felt a sudden wave of inadequacy. Why hadn't she worn something more flattering, sexier? Normally she didn't care what other people thought of her. She was who she was. Sometimes she even enjoyed trying to shock people, or at least get their attention, but this morning she felt overly aware of her shortcomings. Well, I suppose I better let you get back to your reading, she said, adjusting herself in the chair. Russ lowered the papers. It wasn't that interesting. Business? Yeah, our firm does the books for the resort, Russ replied. I'm an accountant. I should have pegged you for an accountant, Deanie scrutinized him out of the corner of her eye. You look like one. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not. What about you? I'm a student, mostly. I'm going into social work, I guess, Jeannie shrugged. Doesn't sound like you're sure, Russ noted. I really would like to help people, Deanie replied. You know, people who are down and out and all that. It's just that sometimes I miss the music business, you know. It's pretty much been my whole life. So you think you might like to follow in your father's footsteps, so to speak, he asked. Well, yes and no. It's actually kind of complicated right now. My life, I mean. She looked down at her hands. Life can get that way sometimes, no matter how carefully you plan it, Russ reflected. Actually, that's probably most of my problem right there, Deanie laughed. I don't often plan anything. I just kind of let life happen. Having a plan can be a good thing, Russ stated. Guess that's why you're the accountant. All those columns and numbers and stuff, Deanie teased. You're probably good at it, too. Probably good at whatever you do. Russ cleared his throat and sat up a little straighter. Well, speaking of plans, I do have a meeting. It was nice meeting you, Miss Burton. He gathered his things and stood up. Deanie'll do, and likewise. Yes, Deanie. Russ hesitated momentarily, turned to leave, then stopped again and turned back toward Deanie's chair. His gaze seemed fixed on some point just above her head. I'd like to make it up to you if I could for being so rude to you earlier. Forget it. I already accepted your apology, she said. How about dinner tonight? Deanie blinked. I'd love to. I'll have all afternoon to spend with Jack and the guys, and then I'll be free all evening while they're playing at tonight's gig. Fine, Russ nodded. He stood for a moment awkwardly. Fine, he repeated. Would 7 be all right? 7 would be great. I'll meet you in the lobby then at 7. Without further hesitation, Russ turned and strode toward the hotel entrance. Deanie flipped her sunglasses up onto the top of her head and watched his retreating figure. Then she settled back into the lounger, a smile of satisfaction playing across her lips. It felt good to be back in the game. That's the end of chapter 2. As you probably know, there's going to be lots more to come as these two very, very different polar opposite people are attracted to one another. There's all kinds of ups and downs and lots of twists and turns and very unexpected events. So that's Play It Again, available everywhere that good books are sold. I invite you over to my website, tracykrause.com, to check this book out and all my other books and plays. In fact, Play It Again is the prequel to this book, Conspiracy of Bones, which has been one of my top sellers, and it's a conspiracy theory, creation versus evolution, but it's their son who's actually the main character in this book. So Play It Again is kind of a prequel to this next book, Conspiracy of Bones. Of course, you don't have to read them together. It doesn't matter which one you read first, but I just thought I'd mention the fact that, yeah, they do kind of form a little set. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining me for Book Talk with Tracy, and I really appreciate the fact that if you're still here, that you've joined me today. So take care. Bye-bye.